and better ways of giving communities voice over their economic and political futures. And because we tend not to do that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that thought was worth the price of admission here. Any other reactions to any of this before we open it up to a broader
We can have a, you think we can open it up? Or do people want to? Yeah.
We can open it up. Yeah. So, you know, raise your hand if you have a question. Please wait for Cheyenne to bring the microphone all the way in the back, sitting on the counter.
Thank you. My name is Jamar Myers Montgomery. So thank you for coming. My question is how do we as citizens gain power when it seems that profit interests run counter to our own interests? And the fact is a lot of us work for the same companies whose interests run counter to ours. So how do we actually gain power in a system like that when we depend on these same companies to help us feed our families, clothe ourselves, and provide housing for us?
That's a great question.
Do you want to start with
Sure. So
it's on you.
the answer, no. So, I mean, I think that there's, you know, the answer is organized. I mean, I think that it's a facile answer, and I think it's something that we've been struggling with across, right, like labor unions have been struggling with it, community-based organizations have been struggling with it, and I think that we have to keep struggling with it because I do think that there's a way in which, as community members and as workers, organizing together around the needs of the community. I mean, whether it's your very immediate community or the national community, is a piece of the answer. The reason I keep struggling is because it is the case that we haven't built the power to really push the economically powerful. And so I think that we all struggle with, right, like that's, I think, in part why we often talk about the small battles. I believe, and I mean, I would be interested in others' thoughts on this, that for a long time we haven't shared a vision. And that because we haven't shared a vision, we haven't imagined the structures that we need to accomplish that vision together and the steps that it will take us to get there. I think that we're getting there. I mean, I do think that we're getting there. And in some ways, you know, I think that there are ways in which the starkness of this particular election season has, right, like, I mean, the way that populist progressivism has risen and reactive populism has risen suggests that people are starting to have that vision and are starting to really want that vision. But I think that it is also like we have to practice the skills of building power in different places. So.
So I'd say a couple very quick things. And it's part of this like pivoting off of how Sibyl closed, but then also what is the broader vision that we might share. One way of putting this, one way I sort of glibly put it is that the alternative to neoliberalism is democracy. Right? We've had neoliberalism for a really, really long time. One of the things neoliberalism does is it sort of thwarts democratic processes and takes really important decisions out of the hands of democratically elected officials and of the populace. The alternative is not sort of more regulation on a worn-out social democratic model. The alternative is democratic empowerment in various forms. To go sort of far down to the ground, another reason why is it so hard for people to take action? I mean, we have profound protections for political protest in the United States, right? Obviously, they're restricted in many ways that are bad, but still, it's a fairly open society. The ability to speak politically and to act politically is available to all. Take Citizens United off the table. I'm just talking about protest here for a moment. Well, if we're in, and this gets to something that Connie was just saying, if you are working 60 hours a week, or you're working 50 hours a week and taking care of children or a parent or a relative the rest of the time, you're not going to have time to engage in any sort of democratic process or deliberation. So one thing we ought to be thinking about, in addition to a right to leisure, is simple stuff like publicly funded childcare, publicly funded elder care, right? Ways that to take those burdens off of individual families where they really should not be resting, which would open up a tremendous amount of time for people to engage politically more.
Just building off of that, and in some ways sort of with using the example you gave right in your question, right? There are a bunch of different pieces that combine to make that sense of disempowerment, right? And we need to sort of tackle each of them. So you mentioned sort of the corporations that we all work for. Well, for progressives like Brandeis, corporate power was a threat to democracy for exactly that reason, right? Not for the campaign finance reason, although there was that concern too, but for this idea that you can't have a democracy where certain actors have so much outsized control without any kind of the checks or balances we would expect of, say, a government institution, right? And this idea that private actors had state-like powers but were not subject to checks and balances was one of the things that got sort of early 20th century progressives up in arms, right? So part of it is we need to sort of bake in more forms of kind of private accountability for private power, right? And then the other side of that ledger is what Connie and Brishan were talking about, right? It's building up the capacity of communities to exercise political influence. Part of that is organizing. Then the last part of the equation, right, I think is this idea of reforming our institutions, right? You can organize and mobilize, but then you need a place to go with your claim. You need an institution lever that you can press on or target, some policy lever that will kind of respond to the needs that you have. And so there are at least three, probably many more like aspects that produce, right, that sense of disempowerment, and we need to sort of unpack each of them.
Can I just add one thing? I'm sorry. I also think that when we talk about organizing, like organizing in organization makes a difference. So organizing in the moment is powerful. Organizing over the long term has the chance of actually shifting power. And so I just wanted to throw that in.
Right. I mean, this is also, I mean, in a way, this is a little bit of a question about labor law and the role of unions, because I'm always struck by, we are very dependent on the companies we work for, but I kind of feel like, people working for GM in the 1950s did not feel like their fate was their interests were the same as those of GM, although they sort of were, but they basically viewed it as a big pool of profit that they should get more of and more voice in the workplace, and we're much more tied in now in a kind of dangerous way, even where there are unions, I think, to the interests of the corporation. I think was there another question right in the back there, Cheyenne, right where you are?
Reporter from Voice America. I'd like to direct our conversation to the ongoing election, and I think two of the panelists mentioned the populism is on the rise in both the United States and also